Hey everybody, welcome back to Jeff Bowles Central. Checking out Stellar Blade on the PS5. So this is kind of a cool game. It's kind of an action RPG sort of thing. It's got some elements that you might find familiar. It's kind of got like the Twitch really tight timing kind of gameplay of something like, I don't know, Elden Ring or something like that. It's not quite as hard as something like Elden Ring, but it does present quite a challenge, especially later in the game. It's not specifically an easy game, not specifically the hardest game you're going to play, kind of right in the pocket of kind of like mid-hard. Anywho, the only thing about it, I find, just to kind of jump right in, is that the action and the visuals are a lot more interesting than the story. I've got to be honest with you, I kind of stopped caring about the story. I was trying to track it, but I kind of lost interest after like the first couple hours because, like, you know, there's like the standard thing of video games where they want you to know a lot of backstory through like reading little text things. That doesn't bother me so much. But you know, there's like a lot of cutscenes that are cool to look at but aren't that interesting information-wise. There's a lot of really fairly blandish discussions and you know, dialogue trees without so much of the tree aspect. But I mean, if you look at it, it's absolutely beautiful. It's maybe one of the most stunning games that we've seen so far this year. You know, and a lot of that happens to do with the character design. Now, the character design of this game is such that we call it a little bit of fan service in the Japanese anime mode of things, where it's a little bit sexual. It's a little bit sexualized, okay? Especially, well, not especially, just the women. The women in this game are scantily clad. There's a lot of skin showing. So I don't know if you have a problem with that. It is an M-rated game, but it is a little bit more in your face than most games you'll find on the market. So if you have a problem with that or like a sensitivity to that, maybe think about avoiding it. Or if you have like you know, people that like children, for instance, I don't know. Just a disclaimer: it's not gonna bother everybody. And in fact, let's be honest, it's a bit of a selling point for a lot of people, especially for a lot of men. It's going to be a thing that a lot of guys are going to pick it up just because it's there. Not to judge, I don't care, just a disclaimer. But anyways, apart from that, apart from kind of the fetishizing of women, of women's bodies, that's a thing in this game. The best, absolute best praise that I can offer is in regards to the combat. It's like one of the sharpest action games I've played in a really long time, and it really just builds on itself. It starts sharp when they're just teaching you the basics, and it just gets better and better and better and more complex and more difficult, and again more twitch to kind of like try to nail all the aspects, you know, trying to a lot like a Dark Souls type game, like an Elden Ring or something, where you kind of have to watch the bad guy for when he's going to strike, and the timing is really important, and it's always unique to whatever specific monster you're fighting. And there's small guys, there's big bosses. The bosses are excellent, you know. So it's a combination of blocking, parrying, dodging. There's some cool things where you kind of can get in behind, like this right here. You kind of have to hit the circle button and the directional, get in behind them, hit a few attacks. There's special attacks. There's a couple of different tiers of those. They have something called beta attacks, and there's a burst attack tree, which is like a super attack. Those are really cool. And what I found about it is that even though I was dying, not super frequently, okay, I have a few chops, maybe not as much as you, expert gamers as you exist on YouTube, but I found I kept wanting to get better at it. I kept wanting to master it. I would die, and I'd get a little cranky about it, but I'd hop right back in. and I'd die, and I'd get a little cranky about it, and I'd hop right back in. And eventually, I was getting not too bad. Like I could hold my own here and there. Again, it's like one of these things, like death in a video game, especially in a game like this, because there's no permadeath. Okay, if you die, you go back to the last save, and the saves aren't super frequent, but nor are they kind of hard to come by. They have little like camp out sites that have all the amenities that you need, the ways to buy more of these beautiful skins for Eve, these slightly fetishized costumes and stuff. And they have vending machines for all the for all the usable items and stuff like that, right? So you die, you go back to one of those, you walk back or you run back to the place, all the enemies respawn. But it's never really a chore, and that's unique to me, because I actually have a very low threshold for repeating myself. Like, you can ask ask my wife, for instance, if I like repeating myself in video games a whole lot. I really don't. But there's a few games, like a good platformer game, for instance, will make me play and play and play. It's kind of addictive like that, and so. The only thing I wish about it is that the story was just as compelling as this combat, because it's really, really not. So this is a PlayStation 5 exclusive, and it's kind of had a lot of controversy here and there. But I don't know what game these days doesn't have a lot of controversy. That is specifically owed again to the sexuality of it, or the fact that For some, it's too sexualized, and so it was too sexualized. So the developer decided to cover some of that up for North American audiences, just a little, and then so the people on the other side of the political debate about this, because everything's politics these days, started saying, "How dare you cover up something that ought to be available to see?" It's never like. It's not even really hard R-rated, or anything like that. Maybe PG-13, but, the level design, to change the subject, is also superb. That was an awful segue. The linking of one section to another, sometimes it's kind of an open world thing. Sometimes it's a very tight, focused, kind of corridor-driven experience, and the ways, the variety of the enemies keep it fresh. There's some platforming stuff. The platforming stuff's not quite as brilliant, just because it's not really built as a platformer. It's built as a fighting, kind of actiony. You know what I'm saying? So, all that in mind. What a review. I'm going to give Stellar Blade here on the PS5. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. I would normally give it a 9, but that story does kind of bum me out. It's not bad, but I got to tell you, for the life of me, I really don't know what's going on with it. I don't know what's going on in it. All I know is there's this girl. She's good with the sword. She wears skimpy suits. That's what I know. So, that's it, everybody. That's it for me. Like, subscribe, share, smoke signals, telecommunication. Bye. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Jeff Bull Central. We're checking out Dragon's Dogma 2 today. This came out about a month ago. I was a little slow on the uptake getting this played. But I'm really glad that I did. If you don't mind me being late to the party for a game review, I'll review it for you because I really did like this game. I'm not super well versed. By the way, I'm playing this on PS5. It's also available on Xbox Series X and S. It's also available on PC. Normally, I play these big adventure type games on Xbox, but I saw a comparison video, I think IGN did, about this graphical comparison, and apparently it plays a little bit better on PlayStation, so that's why I picked PS5 for this guy. I'm not super well versed in the Dragon's Dogma universe. Granted, there's only one other game. I did play it. I do own a digital copy of that original game again for Xbox. I probably played it about 30 minutes and then stopped. This was maybe a couple years ago. Not because I didn't like it. I don't even really remember why. But Dragon's Dogma 2 is a pretty wonderful sequel. It, as I understand it, and I can't speak to it directly exactly, it does a lot of the same stuff. It tells a very similar story, but it's just, you know, it's one of those generational things. It's a generational leap forward, because, you know, that original game came out on PS4, Xbox One, and now we're on Xbox Series and PS5. You know, this game is just really, really great. It's a really great, complex, wonderful, fantasy-based melange of a lot of different types of things, and some new ideas, too. Some actual, you know, honest-to-God, unique ideas. One of the things I like about it is the bigness of a lot of the fight scenes. Mostly what you're doing is fighting small-time characters, or I'd say maybe half the time. Little goblin-type encounters and human encounters and stuff like that. Lizard people. Those ramp up as the game goes along, by the way, as you start leveling. But I'm talking about stuff like this. This giant griffin fight scene was just, like, so wonderful to participate in. And it happens all the time, especially the further you get in the game. And I think, as you can see here, it involves kind of a combination of monster hunting, which I'll talk about a little bit more because it owes direct lineage to the Monster Hunter series. And like Shadow of the Colossus, where you actually have to use a climbing mechanic to get up the side of these monsters and wail on them from whatever position you want on their body, because that's maybe a better way to kill them, because they might have some soft spot up there or something like that, right? But as far as monster hunting goes, and even camping, that's kind of a thing from the Monster Hunting franchise. You have to camp regularly, by the way, because night falls quick. You take a lot of damage, and if you don't camp and eat your meat and take a rest, you're going to pay for it. Oh, lordy, because your health degrades to the point where you can't fill it back up. Your stamina bar degrades to the point where you can't fill it back up, so that's important. They took a lot of ideas from Monster Hunter, which is also their series. That is also a Capcom game series. And though it's a very different vibe and it has a very different purpose, Monster Hunter is more like boss battles of the video game. Every single encounter that you have is a chance to really hone in on your boss battling. And this does have a more structured classical fantasy type narrative with tons of like little encounters and as well as the big ones. But I love the peculiarities of the fights, the specific nature of how these fights go down. You know, like there's some cool staggering effects and stumbling effects, and you can throw things around while also grabbing them to try to get them to pitch left or right, try to get them off their feet. You can hit them with big attacks to try to get them off their feet. You know, you get knocked off your feet. It's the way that you use items, the way that you use magic, the way that you use swords. Every time you approach one of these big fights, it's kind of a stunning thing, and every time you beat one of these big monsters, it's a big accomplishment, or at least it feels that way, as far as video games go. And you know, just like Monster Hunter, I'm comparing it too much to Monster Hunter, but that's only because it's a touchstone series for me. I really like Monster Hunter, and I have for kind of a while now. There's a lot of different classes. And a lot of them you don't even know exist at the beginning of the game. They kind of unlock for you as you go along. So you have basic archer and mage and warrior type class. And then there's a lot of specifications and diversifications that come off of those. But basically what it means is whatever class that you have picked, and the game rewards you for exhausting one class and then picking up a totally different class and trying your hand with that and playing the game differently that way. Point is depending on what class you are, the gameplay changes tremendously. I chose the fighter once that became available because I like a big old sword, and I like to do me some big slow damage and be more precise than just kind of attack. That's just my style. I do get that from Monster Hunter again. Not to compare it too much, but You know what? It's very much like that, and it's very much swords and sorcery. That's the other thing about it that I really love. It's a classic fantasy story with different races and different beings and different monsters, different fantasy ideas. It all really coalesces in this kind of very full, somewhat stylized, but very classic experience, kind of like Skyrim almost. Like, I know that's a bad comparison too, but if you like a fantasy game like Skyrim, if you like a fantasy game like The Witcher 3, this is a great choice. Now, I want to say something about performance, and I don't usually touch performance because I'm not really much of a the technical guy when it comes to video games. I just like the play side of it. I'm not really up on the tech as much as I'd like to be, but I'm not. Just an admittance, just a fair play. But as I understand it, there's the reason that this game has frame rate issues, especially on console. But I understand that even if you play on a really souped up PC, you're not going to avoid that. Is that there are a lot of frame rate issues, and I think, as I understand it, again, this is just my understanding, it is directly owed to the fact that they're using the Resident Evil engine, Capcom, which they developed for, gosh, I think it was Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, which is now at this point a wonderful game still, but an old game. So no matter what you play this on, you're going to have frame rate dips. On console, they specify an open frame rate model. So sometimes it'll run at 60 frames a second. Most of the time it will not, and you will notice the imbalance of slowdown to moving fast. Not surprisingly, it depends on how many objects are on screen, what's going on, how open the world is, how much texture they're using. It runs good. It runs well enough to play. But if you're a frame rate stickler, because you feel that it messes with your play too much, that is going to make you a little unhappy. So there are also some notable issues with texture pop-in. There are also some notable issues with draw distance and stuff like that. As I understand it, again, it's not a hardware issue. This is a game engine issue, so it kind of matters not which system you purchase it for. But look, this is a great game. I'm not going to pretend it's not. It's a wonderful accomplishment. It's a wonderful fantasy experience. I'm going to give Dragon Dogma 2 a 9 out of 10. I'm tempted to reduce that score by 1 point to 8 out of a 10 just because of performance issues, because that really is a hang-up for a lot of people, and I get that. But for me, it was such a complete experience, wonderful fantasy-based action game. Totally should play it if you're into this type of stuff. Hey everybody, welcome back to Jeff Bowles Central. We're checking out a very special video game as far as I'm concerned today. This is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. This is the second part of a 3-game project that's Final Fantasy developer Square Enix has kind of very wisely decided to pursue a while back, and I gotta tell you, this sequel, this middle portion of this game, it's stellar. It's stellar. It's every bit as good. You know what? It's not even just every bit as good as Final Fantasy VII Remake. It's better. It's better than Final Fantasy VII Remake. Now, if you know anything about this game, Final Fantasy VII, you know that after the first portion of it, you leave the city of Midgar, where it takes place almost completely, and you go out into the world. You go out into this open world. Now, in 1997, when the original Final Fantasy VII came out, that open world looked a lot different than what we can do in 2024. I probably don't need to explain that it's a big world, it's a beautiful world, it's a lush world, it's a complex world with tons to see and tons to do. It's not just one or two biomes and all of that, and all of the peculiarities and particularities of that biome. It's not just several different biomes stitched together. It's multi-continental, the world. And basically what I have to tell you is that the integration of everything from combat to the aesthetics of the thing, to the storytelling, to the fact that it's It's dramatic and wonderful when it needs to be. It's silly. It's odd. It's you know, freakish sometimes. You know, everything. The fact that there's a bazillion mini games in this thing, everything is so perfectly integrated into this seamless, beautiful thing. Like Final Fantasy 16 was a disappointment in my book. Because it wasn't as, you know, the side quests, for instance, in Final Fantasy 16 were kind of meek, useless compared to the main quest. Final Fantasy 15 was odd because it was conceptually very strange, and it got boring towards the later portions of that game. Final Fantasy 7, the remake, completely sidesteps all the issues, all of them, that the newer main running iterated numbered series is doing and has been doing for some time. This is the game. This is the only game in town for Final Fantasy these days. It is so good that I have trouble expressing it, and as I think you can probably tell, I don't often have trouble expressing much of anything. Now, there is one thing about it, and it's such a weird thing to even attempt to try to criticize, because it's like, why would I complain about variety? But the thing about this game is that it does become an issue of, it's like mini game the game sometimes. There's so many mini games. There's this Queen's Blood card game, which I loved, by the way. There's things like Tifa needing to do sit-ups to prove a point. There's things like Red 13 playing this really great kind of like soccer type thing. You know, all the mini games, some of them are fun, some of them are less well designed. Some of them take liberties with this one's fun, by the way. Some of them take liberties with the core mechanics and change them slightly, so it's like a little bit jarring. Especially once you get to the Golden Saucer section of the game, everything is just mini games. And what that really does is to serve to break up the basic combat. The combat is a lot more complex this time around, by the way, which I was very glad to see. I'll talk about that in a minute. But I do wish there were fewer mini games. That's an odd complaint, and not everybody's going to have that experience. But I feel like sometimes they took the attention away from what was really going on. But even then, everything is so well integrated. You never really go into a mini game without having a purpose from a narrative, overarching perspective. So even that is such a slight complaint. Basically, everything that worked in Final Fantasy VII Remake, which was basically the whole game, it was such a great first entry. Everything that worked in that game, they worked on. They beefed it up, or they scaled it back, or they made it more specific, or they made it clearer, or they made it more fun by making it more interesting. What's cool about the remake, the Final Fantasy VII Remake, is that it's a combination, basically, of standard action from a modern perspective, real-time action. You press a button, the guy swings a sword. And it's a combination of that with turn-based action, which was the standard, which was the norm in Japanese role-playing games in the 90s, at least. Because while you're Cloud and you're swinging his breaker sword around, you are also making choices from menus. You are doing limit breaks. You are doing team-up combinations. You are summoning materia aeons, summons. You are choosing to do special moves or use items, like you need to heal people. It's a wonderful combination of, I'm doing this in live action and I'm making choices from a menu that keeps it feeling uniquely like Final Fantasy VII, even though that we're now long since past that. It's almost a 30-year-old game. And it was such a powerful game. The reason that game, for me, the original 1997 Final Fantasy VII, was so powerful was, as I progressed through that game, yes, it was fun. Yes, it was technically marvelous. It was the characters. it was the characters that really stuck with me. It was the characters that drove the experience, because the more I got to know Cloud and Tifa and Barrett and Aerith and you know, Red 13, who's my absolute favorite. I love this guy. And this is so ridiculous. This is a prime example of the humor in this game. Red 13 having to basically be Michael Jackson for a second. Why not? The more I got to know these guys in that original experience, the deeper it felt, the deeper it was to me. It felt so good and so real, and so triumphant, frankly. And I got to tell you, this game is succeeding in that way. It is sucking me in. It is drawing me in the more I play this. Now that I've got 2 portions available to me. It's just as magical and just as full and just as engaging. It's more so because it's like everything is so beautifully designed. You come across these little towns, and each one has its own beautiful design aesthetic. It's got its own, feel and flavor in the localities. Every single region has its own type of chocobo that has different abilities and different skills. There are towers to investigate that give you points that go towards your VR stuff, which is not just about fighting summons and earning summons now. Man, I can't sing the praises of this game enough. There's so many beautiful moments. There's so many touching moments. There's so many funny moments. And it's a hell of a lot of fun. Even if you think you know where it's going to go because you're so well versed in the original Final Fantasy VII and all the side lore and cartoons and additional games and stuff that came out about it. Trust me, you're going to be surprised. You're going to be thoroughly impressed. Just the fact that you're not just Cloud, and you're not just one of the others. You get to sit behind the driver's seat of all these different characters eventually, and you get to learn all their specifics, all their peculiarities. Each one of them fights very differently, and that was always the case. And the beauty of the materia system is that you can very easily slot stuff and make them play differently. I don't even think we should be bothering with the core games for a little while. I don't know that we need another Final Fantasy iteration, another Final Fantasy 17. When Final Fantasy 17 comes out, I will be the first in line, I promise you. But what I really want to see for a little while is a continued dedication to taking their legacy properties, making them so good I can't deny the power that this original story had. What I want to see is a Final Fantasy VIII remake. I want to see a Final Fantasy IX remake. I want these to continue because they are putting to shame the main series. That's a hard thing to say because I know that it's harder to invent a brand new world and make it stick than it is to embellish on a world that was already so successful and that so many people loved. I get that. I get that it's not easy to do new things all the time. But this is the game. This is the modern Final Fantasy. This is where it's at. I'm going to give Final Fantasy VII Rebirth a 10 out of 10. Perfect score. You really ought to play it. You really owe it to yourself to check this out. If you got a PS5, do not hesitate. Don't say, I don't know if I like Final Fantasy. This is the game right now. This is the thing you should be playing. That's it.
I know